Homeschooling Law.
Great, so thank you for letting me join you. I appreciate it. And I have put into the chat my email address, so we can share some information and hopefully answer some questions tonight. But if you have additional questions that you want followed up, I'm happy to respond to those. Just send an email to the office and we can hopefully get you some answers to any questions you might have. So I'm going to spend my time, I think, talking a little bit about the law and the rules around home education and kind of what that structure looks like for people who may be new to home education. The law, if you Google it, is RSA 193A. So if you just Googled NHRSA 193A, you will come to the home education laws. And just as context, in New Hampshire, we basically have three educational structures. So we have a compulsory education system that students between the ages of 6 and 18 are required to be in an approved education program. And we might want to ask folks to just mute their mics if they're not talking. That might be helpful. Yeah, there we go.
Thank you.
And so there's three education. So we have public schools, which many of you know, and in public, we have traditional public schools and we have public charter schools. We've got private schools and we have home education programs. And so any one of those three programs qualifies as a legitimate program for a student who is under the compulsory, within the compulsory education age to be able to participate in. 193A deals specifically with the home education program. And I like to, there's a certain myth that I sometimes like to break when I talk about home education. And I have some personal experience with home education, so I can say this with my own personal experience. And that is, oftentimes people will say like, oh, home education is great in New Hampshire because all you have to do is file an intent to home educate and that's all you have to do. And so anybody who's spent any time home educating knows that that's really the easy part. It's actually doing the home education that's really hard. And so that is spelled out in the law in RSA 193A4. It talks about a home education program has to consist of science and math, language, government, history, health, reading, writing, spelling, history of the constitutions of New Hampshire and the United States, and an exposure and appreciation for art and music. I mean, that sounds like a lot of things, but actually as you begin to structure your own home education program, you'll find there's lots of ways to integrate a lot of those areas of study and provide really enriching opportunities for your children. And then another aspect of that law, in the next sentence, that talks about home education shall be provided by a parent for his own child unless the provider is otherwise agreed upon by the appropriate parties named in paragraph 2. And this is another area that sometimes confuses folks. Sometimes people read that and they think, wow, like I'm not qualified to teach, trigonometry, or I'm not qualified to teach chemistry or physics, so I can't provide that education. And what you really need to do is kind of step back a little bit and understand what the idea and how we understand that word provide. All of you provide food for your children, but my guess is that you don't all grow your own food. And so in that provision of food, you're not having to produce it all. You sometimes go to the grocery store. Sometimes you might even take your kids out for a meal. So providing is really about responsibility. In other aspects of the law, we talk about superintendents of schools being responsible to provide education for the kids in a public school, but certainly they don't provide the direct instruction for all of those students in that area. So really, again, home education being one of those three education programs that a child is allowed to be in, that provide is talking about who has that responsibility for providing that education. And so that may mean that you do some of the direct instruction. It may mean that you pull in resources from all kinds of places. As I like to say, kids learn everywhere and all the time, and hopefully you'll take advantage of that and just let them be the curious learners that they are. Another aspect that I wanted to talk about relative to the law is beginning that home education program and filing the intent to home educate. That's covered in that RSA that I talked about, but in section A5, whereas the notification. And it basically talks about when a parent decides that they are going to start it's the word, a home education program for a child, they have to notify, and there's three places that you can provide that notification. you can notify the commissioner of the Department of Education, which is me, and I receive many notifications. If you send that letter or that email into our office, and again, I put that email in the chat box over there, we will acknowledge that back to you with a letter, and then you will know that you are off to the races and have now been enrolled in a home education program. Alternatively, you can notify your local district. And sometimes that might be a good idea, because if you notify, if you've been attending a local public school and then all of a sudden your child doesn't show up in school, the superintendent might be wondering, I wonder what happened to Johnny. But if he knows that you filed an intent to home educate, then they will know where that child is. But again, not required. You can file that with the commissioner. You can file that with a local superintendent. And then another thing is you can also file it with a principal of a non-public school. And they become kind of a participating agency. So if there's a non-public school, you can notify them as well that you're going to be commencing that home education program. So those are 3 ways that you can do that. We do also ask that if you decide to terminate your home education program, that you notify one of those parties as well, just so that we can kind of know if people are home educating or they're not home educating. The next aspect of home educating in the law that I thought would be important to kind of lean in on a little bit is really around the records and the assessment. So you're required to keep for 2 years after the completion of each year, a portfolio of the work that you and your student are working on. And it's fairly easy to keep track of, and the law is pretty straightforward. It talks about a portfolio shall consist of a log which designates the title of the reading materials used and samples of writing and worksheets and workbooks and all the stuff that you would typically keep to just document the record of the educational program that you are running. And this is something that, again, you retain, and you will hold on to it for at least 2 years after after that year is complete. And I'm actually, as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, I'll just weigh in a little bit. The problem that you have with these educational portfolio records that you keep is getting rid of them when your kids graduate from college and you're trying to clean out the basement and you got all these folders and files and you're like, hey guys, don't you want to take this? I don't really want to cluttering up my basement anymore, and they don't want them either. So then you just got to throw them away. But there's a lot of nostalgic things in those boxes that are kind of fun to look through. And then as well, there's a required annual evaluation that is required for students who are participating in a home education program. And you have really 4 different ways that you can meet the requirement for that. One is through what they call kind of a portfolio evaluation. And so you can contract with a certified teacher or a teacher currently teaching in a non-public school. And you can work with them. So this is someone that you would select, and they would come in and they would walk through that portfolio that you've been retaining all year long. And they would be able to look at the work that the students have been doing, and then they would provide some feedback to you on the evaluation. I will tell you that, so I have been involved in homeschooling for many, many years, but going back a number of years, we lived in the town of Mason in New Hampshire. Small little town, for those of you who have no idea where Mason is. But we used to actually have the superintendent of schools would come to our house some of the older students. Sometimes it's easier to administer the Iowa or an SAT or a PSAT or a ACT test, lots of different assessments that are out there and available to you. As well, if you want, your student can participate in the state assessment. So we run the New Hampshire SAS, it's called the New Hampshire Statewide Assessment System. And it is similar to many of those nationally normed tests, but it is an assessment system that we have available to you. And we actually we just released the ability to do that in what's referred to as an open URL basis, so that you could take it at your home. And we have the ability to administer that way as well. And then finally, if one of those 3 ways does not get it done for you, the child shall also be evaluated using any other valid measurement tool mutually agreed upon between the parent and the commissioner of education, the resident superintendent, or the non-public school principal. So if you can't figure out one of those other 3, and just say like, how about this? And we're happy to work with you and try and find something that might help you in terms of completing that evaluation for your child. So that's really the extent of the law in terms of the requirements that you have to comply with. Obviously, you may, as you begin this journey down a home education pathway, you may have many questions. And I'm going to guess that Lori and Darlene are going to weigh in a little bit. Darlene is really, I'm a little bit intimidated because she has such a giant whiteboard behind her and her camera there. So I'm like, whoa, there's a serious homeschooler. Yes, exactly. And she's got a big filing cabinet too. But what I would encourage you as you begin this journey is to be patient. And that patient extends to yourself. It's not supposed to be perfect. It doesn't look perfect every day. If you ask any of our teachers in our schools any day, they will tell you that they don't always have perfect days. So be patient with yourself. Be patient with your children. Children are learning all the time with or without us. The question is, what are they going to be learning? And so just be flexible and patient. And I think what you will ultimately discover is that your children really are sponges. They are curious learners, built to learn, I sometimes say. And the goal is really to nurture that inherent curiosity that children have and let it take them in areas that they're excited about, that they enjoy. So that's what I would offer to you. And then I know our other guests are going to offer some comments as well.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. That was very, very helpful. I'm going to turn it over to Lori right now, and I'm sorry, Darlene, and I'm hoping you could share a little bit more about what the Commissioner talked about how that looks for homeschooling families in terms of, oh, sorry, the light went out. I'll be right back. We're on motion sensor here, so I just have to move every once in a while. Apologies. How that looks for homeschooling families and how homeschooling families make that law work for them in terms of the day-to-day implementation of all those little pieces.
Okay. I would like to share screen.
Can you help her with the screens, Ray?
It's been disabled.
Oh, I'm checking with our tech support here to see if he can help you out.
I'm trying it here.
Okay.
So what you'll do is if you just click on there's a little arrow next to the green share screen button. And if you click on that,
Yep.
and you go, there's a series of radio buttons. And if you go to the second row of radio buttons down and click the first, the one off to the right there, and that will enable screen sharing for Darlene.
Did that work, Darlene?
Hold on 1 second. Here we go. All right.
It's frightening that I actually know that, isn't it?
Yeah, you got this figured out.
Wonderful.
Lori was my backup. She knew what was going on too.
Okay. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I made slides, so there's going to be a little bit of repetition. So here goes. All right. These are the things I'm going to cover, qualifications, requirements, subjects, curriculum, dual enrollment, and all right. So this is what qualifies me too. She graduated this year, and 2 high schoolers and elementary school. So that's the why. All right. Oops. This is a repetition. Okay. Notification. The compulsory law regarding the age groups and maintaining your portfolios. The annual evaluation. For my family, we've only done the teacher or standardized testing. And one of the other things I like to do as well is give yourself time off, because you can't do this all the time, make time for your kids and enjoy the whole process, because it can get overwhelming. All right, now in terms of the notification, all of this material is covered already, and it can be available on the New Hampshire Homeschooling site. So, but I came prepared. Okay, and I kind of snickered, Commissioner, when you went over the law, because I kind of plunked it in here, because you can get overwhelmed, and and, you know, do all these different things and go crazy. Or you can do projects. For my family, we do projects that will include, okay, say we built birdhouses. We can do math with that, you know, writing about it, you know, that covers writing, and a little bit of history and art. So we combine different subjects instead of trying to do all of them, you know. We're not doing school at home, we're doing homeschooling. So, all right, next. And uh, you don't have to have someone approve your program unless you need help. Okay, that was my take on it. Um, Someone else can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of my take on it. Now, dual enrollment, where you can participate. I only covered Bedford School District. I will, in the future, look at the others, but they do have an outline, a document outlining how you can take courses within the school district. And I figure do a little bit of research, you know, and that's it for me. So
Thank you, Darlene. That's great. Gives us some more information about how homeschooling looks for your family and how you can integrate those laws into making homeschooling work for you and your family. And one of the things that I like to think about a lot is that there's no one right way to homeschool, and it's going to look very different for every family. And there are many right ways to do that. So having said that, I'm going to turn it over to Lori now, who will talk a little bit about portfolios and how we can keep track of what we're doing in our families with our children.
So we've been homeschooling a little over 6 years now. From the start, we've chosen to do portfolios. Both of my children don't do well with testing, and that's fine. Like Kelly was saying, every family is different. Every child learns differently. And a lot of you will realize that as you begin this journey. The portfolio I really love doing. Basically, a lot of the things that we put in our portfolios, and everybody's different. This varies. I mean, we have portfolios that are like this big. They're thick. I can see you laughing. But I mean, in your portfolio, you don't need to save everything. Basically, you're saving stuff from the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, the end of the year, just to show progress has been made. I'm different. I put everything in there. I usually do my letter of intent, which obviously you only need to send in once. But for me, I just like to cover everything. And I put that copy in the very beginning of my portfolio, just so when my evaluator comes to look at it, she's like, okay, yep, you guys are you're still homeschooling, you're good. I'll do also the curriculum that we use. So she's not searching through going, well, what have you guys been doing? What program are you using? I like to do like a year-end summary of everything that we went over. I also keep all the book logs, everything that we've read. That could be a read aloud books, or they'll do a lot of individual student book logs, both of my kids. Also game schooling log, that does count. Games do count. We do a lot of extracurricular activities. Kelly knows, I just spoke to her. I run the bowling league, the soccer league. So that all counts as your physical education right there. I do, I'll also keep our monthly schedule, activity logs, field trips, those all count as well. A lot of the films and documentaries that my children watch, that counts as well. And we document those as well. Any live theater, music performances, I keep track of all that as well. Any awards and certificates that your child has received. A lot of community service hours. My children they're 15 and 12 now, so we're kind of getting into a lot of community work and doing things for the community. So I'll keep track of all the hours. I mean, that's not necessary, but this is something that we do. Tickets, brochures, things from field trips, vacations, other adventures. I'll keep that in the back of our portfolios. Artwork that my children have done, photos of large projects. I run 3 homeschool groups, so I'm always keeping photos of all the activities that we do together as a group, videos, things like that. Fitness logs you could also do. We don't do that, but that's also an option. Like I mentioned, photos. So much of homeschooling can't be captured on paper. So I take a lot of pictures of what my kids are doing. Basically, I mean, then I have my certified teacher that comes once a year. We use the same one. I won't use anybody else. I love her. She'll come right to the house. She works with me and my kids. She's very accepting of everything. And basically, I think it's just like we were discussing earlier, I think it's a great piece of memorabilia for your children, just to look back on all these things that they did, all these accomplishments, and it makes them feel great. It's like, wow, and for you too, because as a parent, you want the best for your child. And to start homeschooling is extremely overwhelming and stressful. Like, where do you start? What curriculum do you use? You know, you don't want to fail your children. And to look back and say, wow, you know, I did this. We did this together as a family. I mean, that's the best feeling in the world. So that's about it.
Lori. I was wondering if you could also touch a little bit upon meeting other homeschooling families and how you, either Lori or Darlene, how you went about finding others that were homeschooling. And I know you have some groups that you belong to, and where new homeschooling families might look to find other homeschooling families.
Darlene, did you want to go first?
I checked the New Hampshire Homeschooling Coalition. There's a section for groups, and that's where I've gotten groups for my children. Attended Lori's too as well. So your turn.
Okay. When I began over 6 years ago, I had no support system. We knew nobody that homeschooled. Although I was on Facebook, I had no clue of all these groups that were out there. I actually created my first group on, I don't know if anyone's familiar with this website, it's called meetup.com. So basically you create your own group. So I'm like, well, why not create a homeschool group in New Hampshire? Wonderful, awesome. We get to meet some other kids and have some activities. So that's kind of where my group began, and it just evolved. So this year on Facebook, I have my original group, and then I have a group for teens and queens, and then I have my all-girl group who are teens. I'm just trying to, I want my kids to have a good friendships and have the best activities that are offered out there. And then, like I said, I run all the leagues, so I want to be out there and involved with everybody that I can and help as many people as I possibly can. Because like I said, it's very overwhelming and scary, and you feel so alone at first. So if I can give back to the homeschool community, then I'm thrilled to be able to help.
Thank you, Lori. I think that's really important to keep in mind, is that you're not alone. There are a lot of other families that have done what you're starting to do right now. There's a lot of great information out there, although it can feel overwhelming at times. Just remember, you don't have to figure everything out all at once. You have a whole year ahead of you, and taking the time to enjoy your children and find out what their interests are and what their needs are is a really important part of the process. So don't feel like you have to jump into buying a curriculum. There are many different types of homeschooling families. I work at the Derry Public Library, but I also homeschool my children who are nearing the end of their homeschooling years. And prior to that, I was actually a teacher in Manchester. And you don't have to homeschool any one particular way. There are many ways to do it. And one of the best parts of homeschooling is it's super flexible. So if you find that something isn't working, you can change your direction in the middle of the year if you need to, or from week to week, whatever's working best for you at the time. And for as many different homeschooling families there are in New Hampshire, there are different wonderful right ways of doing things. So the other thing that I wanted to do before we move on to questions and answers, I know that Commissioner Edelblu, you said that there's a way for people to type in questions as they're thinking of them. Do you want to tell them a little bit more about that? I'm not as familiar.
He's muted.
You're muted.
I think you might be muted. Sorry.
I am. I'm so sorry. I can't believe I did that. So actually, so at the bottom of your chat bar, there is, or at the bottom of your screen, there's a navigation bar, and about in the middle, there's something that says chat. And if you click on that, then you can type in a question at the bottom of that chat box, and then we can respond to it. And then actually, so as we're doing that, there's a couple of questions that have come up that I might want to, I can lean in a little bit on if that helps. I'm actually sort of feeling like maybe I'm in the wrong call here, because I'm like, I don't want to intimidate people, like because that the Commissioner of Education is here, and like people are like, I don't want to ask a question, maybe I'll get in trouble or something like that. So I will just say, like, so I mean, I am very familiar with homeschool. So those of you who don't know, so I have 7 children myself and home educated all my kids, and I've graduated 5 of them from college already, and I have 1 in college, and I have a 15-year-old lovely daughter who is, you know, still being homeschooled right now. So I can empathize. I know, like, you can't ask a bad question. I'm okay with that. The second is somebody talked about, so Darlene, you mentioned about co-curricular activities. And so in New Hampshire law, a home education student is allowed to participate in the public school curricular and co-curricular activities. I mean, then there are some limitations on that, but and the limitations are only that the ability to participate in those curricular and co-curricular activities can't have more stringent requirements for the home education students than they do for the public school students. So for example, my son loved to run, and so he ran on the track team for the Wilton High School. And so the school couldn't say, well, Stephen is a homeschool student, so normally kids have to maintain a C average to run on the track team, but because Stephen's a homeschool kid, we want him to maintain a B average, right? They're not allowed to create that kind of disparity. So whatever the rules are for participation, home education students get equitable participation in those curricular and co-curricular activities. Sometimes that's not always understood at the school level, and if you just reach out to us, we can reach out to the school and make sure that they understand that law and how that law functions for those districts. Districts are generally reimbursed if a student takes a curricular activity. A school receives funding from the state for 0.15 of adequacy funding for that particular student. So they're generally open to having students participate in that process.
Wonderful. We did have another question that was somewhat similar to that. A parent was wondering that her daughter was accepted into a 2-year Spanish program at the school, which is more of the academic realm. Would she still be able to participate in this class at the school?
Well, so maybe I don't understand the question. So she was accepted into the 2-year Spanish program? So it sounds like she was accepted into the program. So what is
I think the question is now, if they were to choose homeschooling, would she still be able to be part of that, but not necessarily other parts of the school day?
She would be able to, assuming that she's already enrolled in that program. So it is possible, for example, that, you know, maybe a school has a 2-year Spanish intensive program and they have a limited number of seats in that program. And so it is possible that a home education student could come in after the enrollment is full, and the school would say, normally we would allow you, but even a kid in the high school is not allowed into that program. My guess is that the best way to do it is just talk to the principal and say, hey, we're considering a home education program, but we would like to keep our seat in the Spanish program. And there's no reason why they would be able to exclude you or should be excluding you from that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Ray, do we have some questions coming in? I can't see them on my end.
We do have some. I can read from personally. Okay. And actually, if you click, I think you should be able to see the chat too. If you just click on that chat button, then you'll see them. And yet, well, you may want to just like direct them to one or the other of us.
Okay. Let me see if I can find them. Okay.
So I'm going to jump on that first one while you're reading it, then you can get ahead on the question. Okay. So the question is, we got a kid who's 5, a child who's 5, and so they're going to homeschool that child, and they're saying it'll be another year of preschool. Just to be clear, like at those young ages, they're just learning machines. Just like let him learn whatever he needs to learn, right? Whatever he's interested in, moving forward. So because he's below the compulsory school education, there's no requirement for you to maintain a portfolio for that child, or even at 5 to file a declaration of an intent to homeschool until they reach compulsory age.
Thank you. I had
Well, Lori answered that.
they all are answered that, but I
Sorry.
did have that came in. Oh no, that's great. That came in via email. Do New Hampshire schools regulate the curriculum that I need to use? Do I need to use a particular curriculum? And do the students need to turn their work in anywhere for grades or credit?
Nope.
Who wants to feel that one?
No, I say no, but what if you're, well, I have a question for the commissioner. What if you're working with the school on a plan, then the school will have more weigh in? Wouldn't that make sense? But if you're not,
Oh, it depends what kind. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand what kind of a plan you're referring to, because generally there's not.
okay. In the law, it talked about 193-A.4. Number 2, it talks, you work with parents upon request in meeting the requirements. So if the parent requested help from the participating agency, then they would weigh in on things more. Is that?
So you really have to read that paragraph in context with paragraph 1 and the last sentence in paragraph 1. So then it starts with home education shall be provided by a parent for his own child. So we'll just, as I kind of described there, you're providing food for your kids, and you got a lot of different ways that you're going to provide that food for your children. And then it says unless, and now the unless is what would bring us to paragraph 2. It says unless the provider is as otherwise agreed upon by the appropriate parties named in paragraph 2. And so it's possible, and this would be a tragic case, maybe this isn't the greatest example, but a parent files an intent to home educate their student, and maybe that parent becomes incapacitated for some reason. There's a car accident or something like that, so they're not able to provide for that education. Then whoever the guardian is of that child could turn to this participating agency, you know, the superintendent, the non-public school, in order to work with meeting those and helping to provide the education for that student. So that's really what that's about. But you would only invoke that if you were for some reason unable to provide that education.
But
I see Darlene's processing that.
but I write algorithms for a living, so I'm going through all the broken cases.
Yep.
So in that case, the school will weigh in on what the student needs to learn, no?
If the school is required to provide, right?
Yes,
So the
yes.
first instance would be, for some reason, the parent or the guardian of the child is not able to provide by a parent for his own child. So if the parent can't provide, unless the provider is otherwise agreed. So then what would happen is whoever that guardian is would then turn to really the school system. In many cases, they talk about the Department of Education, the resident district superintendent, or the non-public school. So they might turn to me as a commissioner and say, you know, I've got this child, I'm the guardian, we've got an intent to home educate, we want to continue to keep the child in that educational environment. Can you weigh in and help us in the provision of that education at that point in time? But as long as a parent is able to provide the education, you really don't invoke paragraph 2.
Okay.
And another question that we had come up, I know we've talked about it a little bit, is making a smooth transition back into school. If a parent is deciding to only homeschool for 1 year, what is the best way to approach that? Should they be following the district curriculum? And I know the question becomes a little different in high school as well in terms of credits being accepted in the homeschooling program when they transition back into a high school program. I don't know. Who would like to feel that one?
I mean, I can weigh in on all of them, but I don't want to be the only one talking here. So I would encourage somebody, if you're, particularly we have a lot of families who are filing intents to home educate this year because for whatever reason, the hybrid or remote instruction or just the circumstances of the pandemic are such that they want to elect a different instructional model or learning environment for their child. So if you believe that you're going to do this and you're doing it on a temporary basis, I think it is a good idea to coordinate with your local district and say, I'm going to be home educating my child. You know, and you could even ask them if they would let you have the district curriculum if you wanted to, and use that if you think then that will make sure and allow your child to seamlessly kind of transition back in. Depending upon how old your child is, you know, honestly, at the very young ages, if you're working with your child in terms of literacy and numeracy, they're probably going to be able to very easily and seamlessly transition back into that other learning environment. If you're working at the high school level, it tends to be more course specific in terms of the content that the students are engaging in. And so as long as you understand what the high school graduation requirements are of that high school, and you can fit in the course activity that you're working on as a home education program, shouldn't be a problem for you. I've seen many, you know, it's not that unusual. A lot of sometimes folks home educate their children when they're younger, and then they get to high school, and some people in high school like to transition their kids into the traditional school. And schools on a regular basis are transitioning those students in to the various classes, and they're able to help them figure out where to get placed.
And then another great program at the high school age that is through the New Hampshire Community College system is they have an early college program. So students age 15 and above are eligible to take at the community college for half price. And there's also a STEM scholarship that's available to students as well. So if they're taking a STEM related course, there's a scholarship for that, which is eligible to homeschool students and also to students that are in public or private schools as well. And that's a really wonderful program that you can take advantage of getting some of those college courses in as well as your high school curriculum that you're.
So I might also mention, as long as we're talking about scholarships, so there is something called the Children's Scholarship Fund in New Hampshire. And they award scholarships to families that have income levels of 300% of the federal poverty level or below. And those scholarships are available for, you know, for all of those educational environments, but including home education. So you may be a home education family that needs a scholarship to help you support you with curriculum or other types of materials that you have. And the Children's Scholarship Fund, you can Google that and I'm sure find that. And that may be a resource that's valuable to you.
Thank you. That's great to mention. I totally forgot about that. The other questions that we had, I think, have all been answered. Does anyone out there still have any questions for us? Or Lori or Darlene, is there anything else that you wanted to add in terms of helpful words for people who are just starting out or places to go to look for resources? I know the Derry Public Library, I did include in your email a list of things that we have right here at the library. And we're also always looking to provide more programming that might be of interest to all our patrons, but to homeschooling patrons as well. So if you have anything in particular that you're looking for, feel free to reach out to us here. And then Lori and Darlene, are there any other places that people can look in terms of looking for resources?
Darlene, you want to go first?
Helpful?
Sure. There's the support groups on the New Hampshire homeschooling.org page. That's a good place to start. There's classes, online resources. I'm reading it right now. That's a really good place to start. Also, get to know your librarian. I'm not bro-nosing or anything, but get to know your librarian. They'll know where to find things. So there we go.
Thank you, Darlene. And Lori?
Again, I just want to reiterate, for those of you who are looking for support or looking to, get your kids involved in different activities and classes and groups, as I mentioned earlier, I do run 3 homeschool groups on Facebook. You could search me up on Facebook. I'll be happy to message you and give you the links to those groups. If you need any words of encouragement, I'm always here and able to be reached to help anybody out that needs it.
Thank you, Lori. Just to point out too, I know Darlene mentioned New Hampshire Homeschooling Coalition. That's a website that has a lot of information on it. The New Hampshire Department of Education website actually has a great section on homeschooling resources too. And then there's another fairly large group, which I included in the information. It's called Granite State Home Educators, and they have a lot of resources as well and list other groups within the state. There are 2 of the bigger groups, and they have really well-developed websites with a lot of information. So you could certainly spend a lot of time on there looking at all sorts of groups and things. There are a lot of Facebook groups now as well. And sometimes that's a great way to connect and ask questions, whether it's about resources or the law. And homeschoolers are always very willing to help new homeschoolers out. And Commissioner Edelblut, is there anything else that you would like to add as we kind of wrap this up this evening?
So I guess I want to thank you again. I want to reiterate what Darlene said, get to know your library well, because there's lots and lots of great resources there. And I would just encourage you on the journey, again, to be flexible with yourself, to be flexible with your children, to enjoy the journey. I think Lori kind of alluded to this, like, it's a great adventure, right? And it's very enjoyable. So I would encourage you to just stay relaxed, enjoy the time with your children, and be flexible with yourself and your family.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all of our panel participants. And thank you to everyone who joined us here this evening. I will be available for questions at the library and all of our staff here as well. So we're happy to connect you with the resources that you need as you start your journey. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and I look forward to hearing from you. Bye.